Among the ancient artifacts in South America, there is a group of objects that consistently attracts the interest of researchers. The tourism industry has not overlooked them either. These are complexes with so-called indentations, small Kenko, the Monkey and Moon temples, and the Temple of the Condor in Ollantaytambo. In the surrounding areas, there are hundreds of similar objects, either isolated or clustered in groups. However, due to their ubiquity and commonplace nature, they are no longer considered tourist attractions. They are called indentations, but is this designation justified? When it comes to small objects, perhaps it is. But when it refers to changes in the shape of rocks and outcrops, calling them indentations is no longer accurate. Here, it seems that their creators were concerned with something else. There is also an issue with theories about their purpose. The primary theory suggests that the indentations are a result of material extraction. In this context, discussions focus on methods of excavation, objectives, and the necessary tools and their characteristics. Another theory proposes that some of these indentations were deliberately created as pedestals, shelves, or niches for either practical or ritual purposes. However, in many cases, the purpose of these objects, the ways they were used, and the complexity of their execution remain inadequately explained. This opens the door for supporters of alternative theories, who argue that these indentations are receptacles for equipment, spaces specifically prepared for devices. This film does not aim to prove or disprove any particular theory. Instead, we will attempt to identify the most prominent types of such artifacts and their variations. We will examine their most characteristic features. As for conclusions, those will arise naturally over the course of our review. When you see something like this, the first thought that comes to mind is that the creator was either drunk or angry at someone. Or perhaps they had an unrestrained imagination and unlimited resources. However, upon closer examination, you begin to notice that there is no real chaos. Many configurations of indentations repeat. Some are rarer, while others appear more frequently. There are quite a few that occur regularly. And among them, clear variations stand out. Regular combinations with other configurations of indentations also recur. The number of types that appear consistently is not large. These can rightfully be called fundamental types. And each of them deserves a separate description. The first type to highlight, due to its prevalence and ubiquity, can be tentatively referred to as chairs. Such an object consists of 4 surfaces, 1 horizontal and 3 adjoining vertical ones. If an indentation is located at the edge of a rock base or on a small stone, the creators left sidewalls, which provided a foundation for the 3rd vertical surface. These small walls cannot be explained by any other purpose. If the goal had been to extract material, they would not have been left behind. There are 2 main variations of this configuration, a square type, a long type. Most of these indentations vary in size and proportions. However, several fixed dimensional variations can be easily identified for both types. Many complex objects are formed by layering indentations of different sizes from both the square and long types. The depth of the indentation appears to have been adjusted based on some additional considerations. As for the long variation, the object can be elongated either horizontally or vertically. In some cases, the horizontal surface is on top, making the object resemble a canopy. In others, the horizontal surface is positioned at the bottom. Notably, this type is never found tilted on its side or positioned diagonally. If material extraction had been the goal, such variations would likely have appeared at least occasionally. Single shares are frequently found, both on standalone boulders and on rock outcrops. However, in addition to individual occurrences, several patterns of arrangement can be observed, such as paired formations and complex clusters. In paired formations, a divider is always present between the two shares. In one example, the left horizontal surface is positioned lower than the right one. Even without the divider, this indentation would still retain a full set of vertical surfaces. However, the right indentation gains its third vertical surface only thanks to the divider. The most striking examples are complexes composed of this type of indentation. These structures feature a mix of different configurations in a rather sophisticated arrangement. They include standard square shares, inverted square ones, and inverted long types. Additionally, embedded elements are sometimes present, forming local subconfigurations within the base structure: protruding cubes, rounded corners, rectangular, progressively smaller niches. There are no known niches in which a share configuration is found. However, shares containing niches do exist. In such cases, the niche clearly plays a secondary role, while the share serves as the dominant base structure. Share configurations are sometimes found with protrusions, nipples. In some complex objects, this type of indentation is easily identifiable with all its characteristic features. In certain cases, the dividers are shaped into steps or contained through holes. The side vertical surfaces may be positioned at slight angles to each other. The quality of execution varies greatly. Some surfaces are carefully finished and well crafted. Others are roughly made or even appear almost schematic. These objects are most commonly found in open areas, but they also appear in crevices and caves. Similar configurations, with all accompanying characteristics, are known in other parts of the world. For example, in the Caucasus, in Spain. The second fundamental type of indentation to highlight is the stepped type. It is just as widespread and ubiquitous as the shares, but presents a greater challenge in classification. This is because objects of this type must be distinguished from many others that have a similar appearance but a different origin and purpose. These configurations can easily be confused with actual stone staircases. To differentiate them, it is necessary to pay attention to size variations and discrepancies with standard step proportions. They can also be mistaken for stepped ledges designed to accommodate polygonal stone blocks. Additionally, some objects resemble stepped patterns and ornaments, making identification difficult. However, classification becomes significantly easier when stepped configurations appear in a structured group alongside other types of indentations. There are two primary variations of stepped configurations. First type. These are single or aligned in a row objects with one horizontal and one vertical surface that meet at depth within the structure. They lack side planes. Second type. These have one horizontal and two vertical surfaces. Both of these types are more commonly found separately. However, they also appear paired together in unified constructions with a distinctive appearance. Some of the most notable examples can be found in Kenko, the lower part of the tower at Machu Picchu, and Pamacocha. This type of object also forms complexes with other fundamental configurations. Most often, it appears in combination with simple shares, long horizontal shares. The stepped type also sometimes contributes to the formation of additional, minor configurations within elements of other base types. A key characteristic of this type of indentation is the variety of sizes. Its scale ranges from Regular rows of small indentations, which resemble geometric ornamentation, to stepped ledges on rock faces, often combined with indentations of other configurations. Entire complexes of stepped-type objects can be found on a shared plane. However, they are clearly neither staircases nor quarry sites. Nor are they shelves for placing objects. The third type of configuration consists of diagonal slopes at the base of rock outcrops or entire rock formations. When looking at them, one gets the impression that a massive boulder or an entire rock is somehow suspended. It seems that the goal here was not just to create an indentation within the rock but rather to shape the entire rock formation in a specific way. A frequently encountered example illustrates this idea well. It is evident that the indentation configuration embedded within the slope was also important, otherwise, they wouldn't have deliberately preserved the stone forming its horizontal section. It is clear that material extraction was not the goal here, nor would this structure serve well as a canopy. Some other objective was pursued. In Sacsayhuaman, there are also rock formations shaped in a similar way, but even more intricately. If the goal had been material extraction, they would not have started from the bottom, they would have taken material from the most accessible areas instead. It would likely have looked like this. The angle of inclination of such objects varies significantly. It can be relatively shallow, as seen in these slopes at Kenko. Or it can be much steeper, like the ceiling in the temple at Kenko. Temples in the caves at Machu Picchu. Interestingly, the base rock for these objects was often chosen specifically for its natural sloped configuration at the foundation. A curious example that fits this pattern is the carved stone of Sehoite. It strongly suggests that the natural incline of large objects was further modified. Naturally occurring slopes frequently feature additional configurations, particularly the long chair type. The quality of craftsmanship and adherence to proportionality among these objects varies significantly. One of the most striking examples, due to its meticulous detailing, is the configuration in Napa Iglesia. This object was clearly deliberately created in this form, and it is highly unlikely that the purpose was stone extraction. However, even the natural nature of the slope on which it is situated raises questions. The position and tilt of the rocks forming the cave entrance give an unmistakable sense of artificiality. Perhaps the most remarkable object of this type is the tower in Machu Picchu, which features two consecutive diagonal slopes. The rock face next to the tower also exhibits an artificially shaped slope. It has been formatted not only on the side but also on the top. Additionally, a group of configurations is positioned on top of it, and it is connected to the surrounding structures via polygonal stone inserts. There is also another similar structure, whose construction was for some reason left incomplete. In it, several planned diagonal slopes can be identified, resembling those found in the tower at Machu Picchu. Configurations of the plastic type have a highly distinctive appearance. Their vertical surfaces are always curved. Due to this feature, the term plastic seems most appropriate. However, this plasticity should not be understood in terms of physical changes to the material. It refers only to their visual characteristics. For the same reason, they do not quite fit the definition of indentations. In some cases, it might be argued that such objects are natural protrusions with smooth, naturally formed surfaces, whose upper sections were artificially leveled. This likely occurred when the natural shape of the vertical surfaces suited the creators. However, some objects feature multiple levels of horizontal surfaces. To create the lower horizontal surface in these cases, the adjacent vertical surface also had to be modified. This suggests full-fledged shaping, making it impossible to explain these structures under theories of material extraction or practical, cultic use. Several distinct subtypes can be identified. Semicircular indentations with a single horizontal surface. These may exist as isolated indentations. or as paired formations. Combinations of plastic indentations with other types, with the chair type. With the stepped type. Some examples feature intricate combinations of plastic configurations with a double chair. Combinations of semicircular protrusions with semicircular indentations. These configurations often appear in large groups, forming complex systems of uniform objects. In some cases, vertical surfaces create a closed contour. The fourth fundamental type of indentation is the niche. These structures consist of 2 horizontal planes, 3 vertical planes, 4 variations of niches: trapezoidal, rectangular, horizontally elongated rectangular, vertically elongated rectangular. Depth differences. Trapezoidal niches maintain a consistent depth. Rectangular niches, however, vary in depth. Some are deep. Others are very shallow. Some niche constructions are not immediately recessed into the rock but are instead stepped inward. A similar structure can be observed in combination with a slope and a long chair at Napa Iglesia. Niches in combination with other types. Niches frequently appear alongside chairs. They are also found with stepped configurations and other types. Rarity of niches and their implications. Overall, this type of indentation is relatively rare, which raises questions. If they were containers for ritual, social, or household objects, they would be more common. However, such objects are rare. Trapezoidal niches, in particular, are extremely scarce. This creates the impression that these niches were one-time constructions, designed for specific locations. This impression is further reinforced by the high variability in size, positioning, depth, arrangement in relation to other configurations. If these were objects created for ritual or practical use, we would expect greater consistency in their size, form, and placement. But this consistency is absent. At the same time, it is certain that these indentations were not used for stone extraction. It would be impossible to separate the rear wall of the resulting stone block using simple methods. The presence of excavations on rocks is traditionally considered a sign of a quarry, especially when there are many in one place. This is often stated as, "There are many excavations here, so this is a quarry. Material was taken from here." But what if the configurations of excavations, which are considered evidence of quarrying, are found on boulders or rock outcrops that are part of polygonal structures? For example, let's take Machu Picchu. The quarry from which granite for polygonal structures was taken is located within the complex. And no configured excavations have been found there. That is, the quarry exists, but there are no excavations in it. At the same time, in the structures within the complex, configured excavations are present. There are many of them. In the tower, with a diagonal slope. On the Intihuatana. Around it. It is obvious that their purpose was something else, not the extraction of material for blocks. There are even more telling examples. In this object, for instance, 2 parts stand out. The upper part consists of various sized seats, and the lower part is a plastic-type configuration, containing several niche-type excavations. It would have been impossible to extract a fragment from this place as a whole. Similarly, in Cuenco, at the exit from the labyrinth, there is a large horizontal seat configuration. It is unlikely that the creators were interested in obtaining a solid 6-meter block with such a curvature and such a thin side. Moreover, additional details with complex shapes are sometimes present on the surfaces of configurations. It is clear that these are independent elements, and they would have caused additional difficulties if the goal had been to obtain material. Another aspect relates to logistics and the feasibility of repeatedly extracting material from the same location in uneven, differently sized, and proportioned sections. How many times and in what proportions was material taken here? Sometimes, it is difficult even to count how many cuts, excavations, and in which directions would have been needed to create such excavation configurations. Thus, changing the rules of extraction on the go, and doing so multiple times, is not how material is obtained, even if different block sizes are needed. This serves another purpose. It is also impossible to come up with reasons why in these particular excavations, the material was removed in such a peculiar way. In one case, a cube-shaped protrusion remains. In another, a step-like protrusion. Saxahuaman also contains an example of an unfinished niche of this type. There are also examples of complex arrangements of excavations of different configurations, which raise many questions if they are considered a quarry. For example, the Temple of the Moon and the Temple of the Monkey. Above the cave entrance, there are large stepped excavations. At the same time, nearby, in an easily accessible area, the material remains untouched. In all these cases, the conclusion suggests itself that excavations, both those found on rocks and those present on structures in polygonal complexes, are not related to material extraction. And this, in turn, aligns well with the conclusion stated in the second episode of the film, regarding the appearance of block blanks, that the blanks for polygonal blocks initially had the appearance of unprocessed or partially processed stones. Accordingly, the sites of excavation for such blanks also could not have had the regular, systematic shapes that are consistently observed. The bosses sometimes found in supposed excavation sites also cannot be considered evidence of quarrying. They are not related to block extraction. Thus, it was not the material obtained from the excavations, but the excavations themselves, that were the goal of those who created them. And therefore, the idea of excavations as objects of ritual or practical use seems much more reasonable. However, this does not provide exhaustive answers. When such excavations are located individually or in small groups, this explanation is suitable. But when excavations cover a significant part of a large rock outcrop, or even its entirety, finding a rational explanation for such deliberate rock formatting becomes impossible. The goals and motives of these actions remain undefined. The very meaning of these objects is hidden from us. If we were to create something similar, we would do it differently, in different places, and in a different way. In any case, we would not create them on rock with significant cavities and voids. We would not place them where fractures and faults run through. Why do so if defect-free rock is available right next to it, within arm's reach? It is also impossible to give a definitive answer regarding the method used to create excavations of different configurations within compact complexes. In this example, it is clear that surfaces at the same level are parts of a single surface. It is divided into multiple sections by the overlapping of an excavation of a different configuration. This is not done manually. This approach is used when it is easier to create a surface of the required format in one go and then, using it as a base, create the next surface, also in one go. On this double seat, the surfaces are also created as a single whole. The material contains cavities. And if this were a case of manual processing, noticeable chips would have been unavoidable along the edges of the cavities. This would also have affected the relief of the horizontal surface. It would have been more uneven and bumpy rather than so smooth. They are created within a stone environment. They exhibit all the characteristics of well-defined standards. And, most importantly, these standards remain consistent regardless of the type of stone. The quality of the surfaces forming the object also does not matter. They can be solid or fractured, or, as we will see later, composed of polygonal blocks. Surfaces can be precisely crafted or roughly made. All of this turns out to be of secondary importance, because there is something fundamental, something essential, that remains present in every case. It is not the stone in which the configuration is made, and not even the excavation surfaces themselves. As paradoxical as it may seem, the only thing that remains constant in any excavation configuration is the space defined by its surfaces. In this sense, proponents of the theory that equipment once stood here are partially correct. The difference is that, in the case of space, configurations are not shelves for equipment. They are the equipment. Equipment from the era of stone technologies. Each type of configuration defines its own format of allocated space. Each has its own formula. Steps 1 to 1 or 1 to 2. Seats 1 to 3. Niches 2 to 3. Plastic configurations 1 to 1, but with the ability to create enclosed contours as well. At first glance, this idea may seem somewhat fantastic. But the allocated space is not hypothetical, it is not an abstraction, it is real. Moreover, this interpretation seamlessly and without contradictions fits many of the persistent questions surrounding polygonal complexes. For this reason alone, it is worth refining this hypothesis to the point where it either proves unviable or finds further substantial confirmation. Before moving further in this direction, let's note that the examined objects are situated on bases of natural origin. This is a fundamental common characteristic among them all. A boulder, a rock outcrop, a mountainside, these always fully contain the configurations. At the same time, there are also polygonal structures with two very significant properties. 1. Their purpose and construction features cannot be explained based on the requirements we impose on our own buildings. Their appearance and design indicate that these were structures unrelated to residential, religious, or industrial human needs. 2. They exhibit the profiles of the described configurations. In some cases, these configurations are the only features present in the structures. Furthermore, individual elements of their construction may take the form of configurations. All of these objects are quite large. And, for obvious reasons, the base supporting them does not always have sufficient volume or the necessary shape. In such cases, both the volume and the shape of the base need to be adjusted. This can be done by adding a fill of stone and soil. However, fill alone is not enough. Something is required to help maintain its shape. Something that simultaneously preserves and extends the theme of the base, the core of the structure, making it unified and homogeneous. As we can see, even at this initial stage, the requirements for such a material become apparent. It must be made of stone. It must have parameters allowing for the creation of structures of any configuration. It must have properties enabling its use in pure form, without binding materials. Polygonal blocks and masonry based on them fully meet these requirements. By identifying this fundamental characteristic, we can also distinguish the levels at which configurations were created. There are two levels, each with several independent sublevels. First level: configurations on a natural base. Single configurations, these are the simplest. They can be found on isolated boulders and rock outcrops. They also exist as single configurations within polygonal complexes. Groups of configurations. This is perhaps the most populated step of the first level. Such objects contain at least two basic configurations, always forming a compact unit. Indentations should also be included here. Complexes of configurations. These are rock outcrops with numerous excavations compactly arranged on their surfaces. They contain all or most basic configurations and their variations. Following this logic, similar objects should also be considered part of this category. Most objects at this level feature configurations arranged either as numerous individual elements or as small, distinct, separate groups. However, in some cases, they are assembled in a more orderly manner. The second level consists of configurations based on modified natural formations or created on the basis of artificial structures. Accordingly, objects at this level are larger and more massive. This is the macro level. The first group associated with it consists of structures with polygonal masonry facings. At their core, these structures are based on rock outcrops. When necessary, the configuration and volume of the base were adjusted. The body of the structure was formed using various stone fractions and soil. Then, it was clad with polygonal masonry. Within this group, terraced platforms should be highlighted. They implement seat, step, and plastic configurations. However, they never include niche configurations. Meanwhile, the facades of certain platforms or small platform complexes often serve as a foundation for niches. In some cases, the density of niches suggests that their construction was driven by the need to create this type of configuration. For the construction of terraced platforms, the natural terrain of slopes was utilized. For example, in Ollantaytambo, a natural depression in the slope was used to create seat-type configurations. On the side surfaces of these platforms, there are details that further support this hypothesis. These are protruding, unworked stones. They are often interpreted as steps. Perhaps they were steps. Perhaps steps were necessary in these locations. However, installing conventional steps here was not an option, as it would have inevitably resulted in additional configurations. By using unworked stones instead, the intended properties of the configuration remained unchanged. That said, perhaps the protruding stones were not steps at all. They could have served a different purpose. In Tipon, we can even observe the close proximity of conventional staircases and steps formed by protruding stones. Under these protruding stones, rock outcrops are present. If these staircases were used for agricultural terraces, they would have taken up very little usable space. As for such features in Inca structures, they appear to be a cargo cult adaptation. For the Incas, these elements were employed primarily as an impressive variation of steps. Among terraced and plastic-type platforms, there are also examples with both open and enclosed contours. The next step of the macro level, structures formed using polygonal masonry. In terraced platforms, polygonal masonry is used to create the outer shell. However, in this case, it is used to form all or most above-ground elements of the configuration. Trapezoidal niches facing inward are a regular feature. There is also an example where part of a structure consists almost entirely of groups of large and small trapezoidal niches, which in this case face outward. Looking at such a construction creates a strong impression of its technological nature. This impression is reinforced even more when looking inside. The back wall is densely filled with niches and long seat-type configurations in a vertical position. Next macro-level step, complexes of multiple compactly arranged structures from both levels. The most well-known and striking example of a large complex is Machu Picchu. Although later civilizations modified many aspects of the site to suit their needs, some authentic structures and polygonal masonry have been well preserved. If we mentally remove the buildings made from rough stone, we can get an idea of what the original appearance of this polygonal complex might have been. A slightly better preserved example is Pisac, while it has also seen destruction and reconstruction, much of it remains in its original form. The described levels differ not only in their foundational base. There are also nuances in how types and variations of configurations were implemented. At the first level, C-type configurations do not appear in a vertical position. At the macro level, such an example exists. At the first level, niches are diverse but few in number. At the macro level, they are a regular feature, though rectangular ones are rare, with trapezoidal niches predominating. At the first level, horizontally positioned niches are extremely rare, appearing only as a required element in so-called fountains. At the macro level, polygonal structures in the form of rectangular buildings automatically fall into this category. This perspective unexpectedly provides a simple and logical answer to the question: did they have roofs, and if not, why? Roofs in such configurations would not just have been an unnecessary detail, they would have contradicted the very purpose of the structure. The abundance of trapezoidal niches, facing both inward and outward, also takes on a technological meaning in this context. This version of their function also explains why rectangular openings and passageways are so rare in polygonal structures. When they do appear, they are often found alongside trapezoidal niches and doorways. Rectangular openings were known to the builders and were used, but seemingly only where the movement of the site's inhabitants was intended. Trapezoidal openings, on the other hand, likely served an additional function beyond facilitating movement. As we can see, there are clear distinctions between the levels. But there are also examples where the configuration and composition of objects are nearly identical across levels. Some macro-level configuration complexes are integrated into uneven terrain. Others tend toward elevated areas or mountainsides. Patterns can also be observed in their placement and composition. However, describing these patterns is a separate and extensive topic that requires detailed analysis. Thus, in conclusion, we will briefly touch on cases where a complex is embedded into a mountain landscape. In its classic form, such a site appears as though an artificial structural shell, partially or completely envelops a natural rock core. At the mountainside or foot of the mountain, groups of terraced platforms are present. Higher up, on a natural or prepared platform, are structures with niches, as well as rock core structures. Among these structures are indentations, usually protruding rock formations that have been given specific configurations. An indentation can also be located inside a structure. In Machu Picchu, it is inside the tower with a diagonal slope. Since such a complex is built on a base that naturally resembles a pyramid, the entire structure may exhibit some pyramidal characteristics. At this point, there may be a temptation to draw parallels with other well-known pyramid-like structures, including classical Egyptian pyramids. Of course, some commonalities exist, as both types of structures are based on the same fundamental principle. Similarities may also be found in specific details. For example, identical stone processing marks have been observed in both Peru and Egypt. This could indicate that similar or even identical tools and techniques were used. However, these constructions do not fully align with pyramids. The key fundamental difference lies in their base, the foundation of the structures. In Peru, there is an abundance of mountain slopes of all types. Gentle, steep, fractured. Even with minimal modification, this allowed for diverse construction projects. Here, there was simply no need to use the same principles that had to be incorporated into pyramids out of necessity due to the lack of a similar natural foundation. The natural foundation, by default and almost for free, provided here what had to be deliberately achieved in pyramids through considerable effort and knowledge.